It is 5:30. Call the meeting to order. First up is the long-range financial plan and the 2020 enterprise fund budgets. Mr. Merrick and Mr. Abdo, Mr. McDonald.
I'll answer. All the above, huh?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to address, before I get started, that we do have a pretty meaty work session agenda, so I don't want to rush you on any items. So anything that we don't cover in the work session, I just ask the Mayor and Council to add that to the regular meeting agenda. But typically we'll put items that don't require specific action on the work session agenda, and so in order to kind of keep that same process, I did that here. We'll add them to the regular meeting agenda if we don't have time. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So did a little bit something different here this year, combined the enterprise fund budgets with the presentation of the long-range financial plan. And Steve and I are going to kind of intertwine in the presentation here. There'll be some deep dive kind of financial aspects that I'll be teeing up for him, or if there are questions related to some part of the plan that you have questions on, I might defer to Steve on those areas. But I just wanted to kind of get into what our goals of the plan are, and that's really, we want to create an opportunity for the council to discuss really significant future capital and operational needs. And so what those impacts are going to be related to user fees. There are areas in here that do affect property taxes, so not all of this is enterprise funds. You'll see, like, for example, the Carver Parkway Corridor project in 2021 has a property taxes implications. But we also want to kind of use this as kind of a laboratory here and develop strategies and alternatives to meet some pressures that we might be faced with, for example, kind of the big piece for this year's plan is the water treatment plan. And so we want to go over those options and develop strategies. Maybe some of them aren't even ones that we put in here. Some of them come from the discussion that the council has tonight. And then finally, I want to really kind of hit on this, is that this is a plan. So you're not approving a certain project, so like whatever you talk about related to the water plant or a certain piece of equipment in the public services department or a street project, you're making a plan, and then that plan will inform what you decide to do with maybe water rates or property taxes, but you're not giving the okay to build a $10 million water plant or buy a $50,000 lawnmower. So it's a planning document that helps you make decisions in the future. Any questions on that before we get started? So dive right into kind of the big pieces. Initially, we had planned to construct it and been talking to the council about a 2020 water plan of about $14 million, and we had kind of gotten back and forth on this a couple of years ago. Kind of really initiated by some creativity on Brian's part, is looked at building kind of a water skid plant. So we have skids or water filters on the bottom of the large tower near Mills Fleet Farm, and settled at a number of right around $6 million to construct a kind of a long-term skid plant. But as we studied that, found that the cost to treat that water was going to be more expensive over time, and so recently started looking at more of the traditional brick and mortar water treatment plant. As we get into more slides, you'll see kind of what I'm relating to in the second piece is we're finding, and Steve can get into kind of his financial perspectives, but really are struggling with the feasibility of constructing a 2021 plant using that kind of long-term treatment model, $14 million. Now, I say that with the kind of caveat that it'll be more expensive to delay this, meaning that you have, and I'll skip down to kind of bullet number 6, is that if we predicate that decision that you'll need a water treatment plant in 2027 for $17 million, and you construct interim treatment for $6 million, the simple math is you're spending $23 million for water treatment. The backside to that is, in order to fund that, you'd have to increase water rates for residents on the base rate and all 3 tiers by 35%, and then the water connection fees by 45%. And we'll get into some of those pieces, but there's a really interesting dynamic, and I'm not going to pretend those are the only two choices. We might take a little of this and a little of that and create something different here tonight. But I think, at least for the conversation purposes, it provides the stark contrast between the choices that you have. And so this is using a 2021 model where we have a $6 million interim treatment in 2021. And then based on growth, that could last you to 2027. It could last you into the end of the decade, or it could last you till 2025 based on the number of rooftops we get in that water demand. And so tonight we'll be focusing primarily on the financial aspect, but when we get later on into the year and talk about the actual treatment and how it works, Brian and Dan will get into talking about it. We've kind of covered this, but you plan for your peak use, so it's that high, that summer day where people are really using their irrigation systems. That's really what we have to plan for. So you can see that impact on water rates at 5% and what that does from 2019 to 2020. But
That's 5% per year, correct?
Correct. So now you can see the difference between the interim treatment of 6 million, which could be last us to 2027 or beyond, or just digging in right away for 14 million in 2021. And this is just on the rate side of things. And so you can see the difference on 8,000 gallons, and that is quite a bit of water for a family of 4 to use. They'd be sprinkling under that scenario. Typically, you're going to find a family of 4 right around that 4,000 to 5,000 gallons. But you can see the difference of that 35% increase and what that does. There's a bunch of different ways to look at it, but for context, it says $16.20. But the percentage and the kind of the nuance behind explaining to residents and rate users that their bill is going to go up 35% is a challenging one. And so then looking at that compared to the 17 million and the 6 million, there's certainly some choices to make there. I'm going to skip around here to this next slide and then hand it off to Steve on kind of just teeing up some of the financial pieces. But this is the connection fee increase based on a 2021 plan. So that's interim treatment at 6 million. If you did a connection fee at 45%, which is what it would take to do the full build at 14 million, you're starting with connection fees in 2029 or 2019, which are at 7,500. But by the time you get to 2024, they're 19,000. So that's 45, 45, and then successive years of 8% the last 3. So
that's an increase every year.
Right. So from 2019 to 2020, you go from 7,500 to just under 11,000, and then in 2021, you go from 11,000 to 15,800. So I mean, there's some significant pieces to take on there. So I think with that, Steve, if you just wouldn't mind providing a little bit of context how those numbers are created and maybe the key targets for debt service and operating, et cetera.
So where we set the targets, if you look on, I won't get too far or too deep into the details, but I think it's important to understand the targets. So if you look on page 35, and if you look at 2024, the second, the
So
last
Steve,
one-
they're
Wait,
paid,
wait, wait.
they're
Yeah,
paid,
our
they're
page
paid.
number-
Hold on, I gotta go way down here, hold on. I
Okay.
can't get the 35.
So it's not 35 of the packet, it'd be 35 of the.
Page 60.
60. Thank you, Glenn.
Crap.
It's funny, I'm always an advocate for electronic, and here I'm.
Uh-huh.
I know. Well, so in the water fund, what you see in front of you is projected cash flow based on the rate increases that Brent just had gone through. And what we're trying to do is maintain a cash balance adequate to fund your ongoing operating expenses along with your scheduled debt service for the year. We even in this target, we don't really have a capital replacement. So this is a pretty lean conservative target. So where we started about $1.4 million in 2019, that grows to about 2.4 million. The reason it grows is because of the bonds that are issued in that time frame. Debt service gets to be a more significant expense. So at the end of 2024, you can see that we're at target. We've maintained at target through most of the projection. But again, it's under the assumption that there are bond issues in 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2024 to cover those major project costs. Okay, and so with that target, we are adjusting what rate increase is needed to hit that target at the end of the year. So that's where the percentage increases for the usage and connection fees come into play.
When you say the end of the year, the end of each year?
Yeah, end of each year.
Okay.
Yeah, throughout the 12 months, there may be some fluctuation in there as you pay debt service. But that's why the cushion should be sufficient.
So, and this isn't, you don't need to jump right to the solution piece on this. We'll want conversation and want to be able to answer questions, but there's a critical path item where the city can adjust its connection fees essentially once a year, and so we need to follow what we've traditionally done for fee schedule changes. We look at drafts in October, November, hold public hearings. Connection fees are considered a land use fee, so that we can only incorporate that change in essence later this fall. And so whatever you do related to that fee is going to set the tone for, it's almost in essence like setting the preliminary levy for the regular budget. You're kind of setting a budget for how you want this to track. It doesn't mean you can't change your mind, but you're taking a major step forward as it relates to connection fees. And frankly, you did that last year by raising the water connection by $1,500.
And then we didn't find out that we're not collecting them until what?
June, correct. And I think we've gotten almost all of those reimbursed back to the city, so we're in good shape there.
Do you know
We
what,
won't forget this one, will we?
you know what roughly the percentage increase was? Or the ballpark? Like were we at the 6 or?
1,500 into 6,500.
25.
Or no, yeah, 1,500 into 6,000.
Yeah, 6 or
Actually,
25%.
okay.
25%.
About, 20.
How did it go over? Or I mean, I know this is not maybe a good measurement because it was kind of a delay in getting it.
It's a
implemented.
pass-along expense.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't receive any feedback. It doesn't mean there wasn't any feedback as it relates to their reaction to it. It's been if you followed some of the recent articles in the Star Tribune, the Builders Association has struggled with the cost of fees, and they've focused primarily on building permits, but connection fees, park dedication fees, other related infrastructure fees. We talked about last year about road transportation fees. Those are all kind of right at the surface for builders and developers as it relates to their interactions with cities. So, I was mentioning this to the mayor earlier. If the city embarked on a path to increase connection fees by 45%, I'm betting that there would be a pretty robust conversation between the city attorney and Steve to make sure that we have a really good, not just the long-term plan, but a narrative that explains how we arrived at these numbers, because you're going to go from 7,500 to 10,800. People are going to ask questions and want to know how that.
Well, then you said that it compounds to what, 19,000 in 5 years?
Correct.
Does that take us out of the market? I mean,
Really?
yeah,
That's
I
a
mean,
pass-along, that's
Yeah.
a direct pass-along expense to the homeowner.
So the last connection fee study that we did related to the utility rate study, the highest connection fees that we found for the city of Delano at 15,000. So
50,000 for this portion,
for
For
everything.
their
for
hookup.
the everything.
So that would include 15,000 for water, sanitary, sewer. Yeah, those are the pieces. We have a different piece where it's water, sanitary, sewer, and then the Met Council connection charge as well. So, I mean, you'll find that in some communities, especially when they build either water treatment or wastewater treatment, they're going to have extraordinarily high connection fees compared to maybe, neighbors to the east. So we found that like Elko New Market, Delano, Jordan had high connection fees, and I think we are probably more similar to them than, even though Chaska's shares a border with us, we have more in common with Elko New Market and Jordan and Delano, just because of our size and how our infrastructure is developing, where Chaska's, more built out in terms of infrastructure and land development.
And they got a bigger base.
I have a question. I don't think I understood clear. So the Delano 15,000 includes what?
water and sanitary sewer.
Okay, and so the 19,000 for us though would only include
Water.
water.
Like but our sanitary sewer connection fee is like $800 right now, so not that that's not a
And the
lot of
Met
money.
costs what?
2,200?
All right, so now we're talking $22,000 for somebody to flush the toilet.
Drink less water.
Flush the toilet,
Yeah.
sanitary.
Yeah, that's a small percentage.
For the connections.
Correct.
What do you think,
I
Courtney?
just wanted to make sure
You're
we're
gonna
No,
say something.
Yeah, so what I'm struggling with this is, well, are you good? Are you done? Do you wanna keep?
I have more, but this is, I think, where we need to
Okay.
stop and talk about the water plant.
Okay, so in terms of the water plant, what I'm struggling with is the $6 million investment in a year with then another $17 million and paying more in the long run. In my mind, while these rates initially are really, really, really hard to stomach, I don't want to kick this issue down the curb any further than we have already. I think, you know, I don't know that you went into it a ton, but of that $6 million, none of that do we really get back in 6 years,
Right.
you know?
I would say the lion's share of that. I mean, so we built these in with pretty heavy contingencies because we don't want to come back to you and say, you know,
Oops, here's another million.
right.
Right.
There are opportunities to reuse. So example, you build a building for this interim treatment, you pull all the equipment out when you're done with it, and that's the public services storage building that we've been talking about for a couple of years.
That's in the list.
But as far as kind of the treatment apparatus, you're losing much of that system.
Which is the bulk of that $6 million
Correct.
investment. So that's a $6 million Band-Aid that buys us 6 years. And then, in
Could it buy
6
us longer?
years, potentially, depending on
It could.
development.
Could it buy us longer?
But then, in 6 years, we've got to have the same conversation again. And are we talking 45% increases?
Right.
Or are we talking
Yeah,
higher?
50.
Well, and Steve and I talked about that. Steve, can you shed some light on that?
That, it was a quick calculation, but if I drag out the principal and interest and the revenue, or the usage charges and the connection charges, the spread between net operating revenue, which is your charges to customers minus the expenses to run the system, plus your connection fees, the spread between that and debt service is about $1 million. That $17 million, or all the debt that you have outstanding at that time, is about $2.5 million. That's really the big issue.
So in terms of like a rate increase, we're not in the 35 and 45%.
I don't think so.
Under 20?
Probably not. It's probably around that.
So if we get to fees that we're charging $22,000 for these connection fees, have we priced ourselves out that we're gonna slow build it and now we don't need the water treatment plant because people aren't gonna come when they see these inflated prices, when they can go to Jordan or whatever is nearby.
We were gonna put in a water treatment plant in 2 years.
We
Right,
talked about it.
2021, right? That's what we talked about,
Mhm.
needing it. But we're looking at, wow, that's a really big cost to do it at 2021. So I feel like even if there were a slowdown, we still need a water treatment plant within the next few years. At least that's what I've heard.
It's probably a sliding scale. I don't know what the touch point would be for a slowdown and how that would equate to not needing additional treatment.
Yeah.
The connection fees are certainly more volatile, because if you have a slowdown, you're not collecting them, or the base rate is something that you collect from the existing. From a high level, Dan, is there anything that you can see that would prevent the city from needing a new water treatment plant in 2021?
2021?
Right, would growth just have to stop cold?
Yeah, I would say it would be a significant risk to not to plan to increase your treatment capacity, because you're gonna start to get outside your firm capacity window, which is, and that if you build out everything you've got planned, I think you were asking about that a while ago, if you build out everything you got planned, you're getting right into that territory of having some capacity increases. So to some degree, yes, you would need something in the next few years. Not, 1.5 million gallons immediately, of course, to up the capacity. I
When
don't
you
know if
say
that
build-
answers the
yeah.
question.
When you say build out everything we got, that's just what we have platted now?
Yeah, and what's in the very likely territory of, the things that are in process, song
So-
development, if that were to go.
There's
I
another
would say that
310.
what you have in the pipeline is gonna keep creeping you upwards as they tend to build out.
Okay. Are commercial and industrial hookups the same price as residential?
Yeah.
A hookup's a hookup.
Yeah, their rates are different.
So with the,
Yep.
so it's not one for one.
What's the answer for that?
The city, most cities adopt a formula called a residential equivalency unit. It's in your code. And it depends on the type of the use, but a very, very large industrial use might pay 45 water connections. I mean, it sort of depends on the use. I mean, if they've got a process, if it's, say a machine shop where they're washing and cooling equipment with water, yeah.
What did Lakeview? Okay, anybody? Yes?
I don't know.
Okay,
10 units, I think.
okay.
The one example I'll give you that's very painful that happens in communities with these rates is beauty salons. Every station is, I mean, it's really prohibitive. I mean, so Great Clips wants to come to town, and there's nothing you can do about it, it is what it is. But that's the one where I've really heard pain in other communities.
Or for example, I mean, recent memory, coffee shopping, so like someone retrofits a building for a coffee shop,
Right.
they pay if they get one unit that they have to add, they're adding whatever our water connection is and the sewer connection. So when a cup of Carver opened, that was, $20,000 worth of fees. So take that number and multiply it by the connection fees that we're talking about. And that was something that the mayor and I kind of talked about earlier today. It's the developers is kind of one bucket, but then there's going to be these, like a multifamily housing project where there's maybe 110 units, or there's going to be a mom and pop coffee shop or a beauty salon, that's going to come up, and I think that'll put some pressure on the 5 of you to feel comfortable with your decision as we move forward.
Do you think the CDA would block at their 105 units when let's say they build within the next 2 years, it's only gonna be 14,000 and not 19 to hook up?
I have a response to that, just for dialogue, is, I don't think we should play out the scenarios of, are we at risk of builders walking away, are we losing their market share? I don't think we should think of that, have that fear. I think we should base it off what we need and what we're comfortable with affording.
Well, what we need right now is, we're using what we have as a need. We're looking at where we're gonna be 20 years from now.
As well as possibly 24, 36 months from now. Not-
Agreed.
Yeah.
But right now, at 36 months, let's say 3 years, we're at the capacity we have, what we have right now will hold us through those 3 years. What we're doing is we're talking about how much money we're gonna start putting aside to build a plant.
Right, and then that just still comes back to, I don't think we should, minimize the fear, risk of, do we price ourselves out of the market, or builders gonna walk away? We just can't control that. Regardless, we have to move forward.
We have to be, it has to be part of the conversation. It does. You're talking about doubling the cost of a hookup, and that's every homeowner. And what did you pay to hook up?
I'd have to look, probably maybe 2,800, 1,800.
And so now we're talking
But I
about.
put it, roll it into a 30-year mortgage, so
Well,
I don't see
but I
it month to month.
But I understand that. But
And
at the cost of the building permit, that just went from, what, 10,000 to 30? That's the building permit
Yeah, it would go from 10,000 to 30.
Yeah.
in 6 years. In 6 years.
Maybe 10 to 20.
No, that's just the water, that's just the hookups. That's when people come in for there's more than water, sewer, and hookup fees in the Beverly permits.
Right, I guess
I'm just,
yeah.
we need to be cognizant,
Yes,
it has to be
100%.
part of the conversation. We can't just say, well, yeah, it's just a pass along expense to the homeowners. Now what type of homeowners are we gonna have moving in? Going, boy, you drinking gold there in Carver or what? But the reality is, we're gonna be 7,500, 10,000 people in 5 years. That's the hard pill to swallow.
Well, and this isn't fun, this isn't
Oh, no.
New City Hall, right?
It's not
You know,
meant to
This
be.
is not a sexy investment, this is something that we need for daily life.
There is
So,
no do nothing
You know, I
scenario.
think what we need tonight is we need some direction, and reel me in if I'm wrong, but direction on what we want to do for connection fees next year and then potentially water increases.
Yeah.
Just to look at. I mean, that's the water, or the connection fees are what we're really under the tight deadline on, to give staff some direction so that we can get those dialed in for 2020. So,
I mean, we'll really push on bringing those numbers down. At this point, we're gonna plan for the worst and hope for the best, as far as like, let's not add anything that we don't need to add if possible. And let's really have a critical analysis of the type of building, the construction materials that we use. But if you say, if I hear from the council, like, man, we'd love to do the long-term treatment, we're not comfortable with the consequences, whether unintended or not. Shape your fee schedule based on the 6 million, then we work on that. If you said, it's gonna be tough, but that 14 million, it's the best long-term solution. Really get those pencils sharp, let's start working on other paths, and we tailor a fee schedule that would be based on that philosophy.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So, a little bit earlier in the document here, so we have the projection for the new homes coming in. So 2019, 156, 2020, 156, and then by 2021 to 2024, they're cut in half. And now I know they're just projections, but is there a reason that they're cut in half? Because we're saying, oh, we're growing, we need this. But if we're cutting down even the new homes that are coming in, is there a reason?
It's just an under promise, over deliver kind of philosophy, and especially on if you're building connection fees in there, you know what the users you have as far as rates go, and so you can calculate that with a pretty high degree of certainty. But if we put in 156 units for 2021 and we hit 80, then all of a sudden we're really going after those rates in an unexpected way where we could end up having double the amount of new connections next year, and that'll take pressure off the rate strategy and connection fee strategy we're talking about tonight. But we don't want to plan for that, because if it doesn't happen, or if it happened, like 2008 and 2009 happen again, we don't want to be coming back to you saying, our connection fees were so far off. Now, we think that they're realistic, but I would acknowledge they're really conservative.
So on an annual basis, we will still evaluate those connection fees, right? So
Correct.
depending upon whatever reality of home new connections happens, we might not have to increase that large of a percent each year. We
Right,
might
so
be able
like,
to taper it down a little bit.
The 2019 projection is 156. Part of that includes a projection for the CDA doing a project. Well,
Mm.
I think we're close to 80 new home starts this year, which is close to double what we had last year, but we're not gonna be at 156. But if we have close to 100 next year and then the CDA comes in, then all of a sudden we have 210 and we plan for 156 in 2020. So you can kind of get the sense of where we're heading here. We weren't, actually, I think we do have connection fees that are probably gonna be at 156, because if you count Carver Ridge, that was probably 70. So we're right in the neighborhood, but I think just in this conversation, you can see there's a little bit of volatility. And there's I think there's more significant consequences to overestimating the connection fees as a part of the analysis. Granted, you can be too conservative and it throws your numbers off, but I don't think we're at that point.
So my opinion is we really sharpen our pencils and we go for the better long-term investment in building the water treatment plant sooner rather than later at almost twice the price. I think that this is a really bare bones building, no bells, no whistles, no elevators. No elevators. More of a fire station, a public works building than a city hall, to give you some reference points. And I am comfortable with increasing the hookup fees because if you take a look at this issue, we're at this point because of our growth. It's the new folks coming into town where we need this. I also think that raising the water rates, I get it, that water is expensive in Carver. I'll own that. But we have a need for a water treatment plant and that's expensive. So I think the folks who decide to use our drinking water on their lawns should absolutely pay more. If I decide to start bottling water and selling it out of my home, I should pay more as well. I'm fine with the larger increases to make this a better long-term investment and less money in the long run.
Yeah, I agree with what you say. I want to highlight a couple points. Earlier you made a statement about how you were concerned about if we did the interim and then having another big giant. So we do an increase now and then we have another, right? And those two big giant increases sound more painful to me than a bigger one up front. So I am also for the long term. In the immediate term, how do we say this? The bigger expenditure up front.
14 million in 21.
14 million up front and figure out how do we do it. Sharpen our pencils like everything you said. I agree with the statement around increasing the connection fees because it is new growth that is driving us to need to have this capacity. And I'm okay with rates going up as well because I think that the entire community does benefit from the continued growth of this community. We're not going to get new amenities in town if we don't have more rooftops. I'm with you.
My feedback would be, I'm with the long term also because you used the word infrastructure. So if it's something that's going to be part of the infrastructure, yeah, I would support that. And
Just so I'm clear, spending the 14 million versus the
million.
6
Yes.
million.
Yeah. My analogy would be and I don't have the right words, what do you call that, recyclable decking instead of having trucks, instead of having to stain your deck every few years.
Yes.
It reminds me of that.
Good attempt at the analogy. We're gonna have that.
Yeah.
To improve it if you ever need tips or pointers.
That's true. Yeah. I put that thing down and replace it, but it
Yeah.
just be starting over money-wise. It's not starting over. It's
Yeah.
painful. And I just don't think that's a good reflection on cities. Sometimes when you see something decommissioned or like, why did you all grow that already? Or how come you can't? So it's the long-term part. So I would support the 14 million.
So is there a point where at what point do we reach capacity? Like, we just don't have any more, we don't have enough? I mean, what are we looking at for something like that?
Well, a lot of it's not the day-to-day capacity, it's the peaks in the summer where we're pushing it. So right now we're, with our skids and the second one we added this year now, we bought time now to get to 2021 and start pushing that, working on that plan. So it's those peak dailies, and if we sustain them over a few days, that's when we start really kind of draining on the system. So we've had 2 really wet years, so we haven't experienced it prior to the last 2 years. Then we started seeing those again, where we really saw those and started planning for it now. So.
What else is coming down the pipe for capital improvements?
Let me,
Oh, look at the debt that we have, all the debt that we're looking at.
so here are some major pieces would contain within the plan. So either way, we're gonna need to buy land or property to build a treatment plant or interim treatment. And we're working through some scenarios for that. The council has already taking out debt service related to a well. Dan Lannis is gonna be kind of going over the JCP improvement project, related to some local streets, the actual corridor. And then, related to that, there's, based on our 2040 comp plan, we'll need sanitary sewer upsizing. And so, kind of from a cost efficiency perspective, it's better to put that upsizing in when Jonathan Carver Parkway is dug up rather than dig it up and then pay for the sewer and the street, because the county wouldn't be a participant. It shows water treatment at $6 million. We have a sanitary sewer crossing. We have the Ash Street lift station, which is the last stormwater lift station in the levee system. When we hit 5,000, we have a tentative agreement, or at least a letter of interest that the city sent to the county that we take over County Road 40. There might be some upgrades that the city wants to consider when that happens. And then lastly, the public services storage building, we have programmed for 2023. There are a variety, as you can see the details, different vehicle and equipment replacements. I would say these are the bigger items. And then,
They all add up.
Right, and they're just, something that's not on here, but I think is probably on the front of everyone's mind is when the grant sunsets for transit, what we're gonna do there, and what that looks like. Are we gonna join the transit taxing district? Are we gonna find someone to pay our match? Are we gonna pay that local match of probably right between 180 and 200,000? There's a bunch of different scenarios to go through with that. We have some time to go through that, but these are the big items. It doesn't include, as it says there, the game changer is a certified levy, and if we have a local share there, what year that happens. But this slide represents the big items. This might be a good pig in for Steve. If you were to summarize the long-term plan and the impacts based on everything.
I have a couple questions
Oh,
about
sure.
some things that are
Yeah.
listed. So the Ash Street lift station, Brian, what do you envision that is going to be? What are you doing there for that?
Well, we're just, and the structures are falling apart, so
Okay.
those have to be done. One of the things we talked about, again, this is real high level, we haven't spent any engineering time on it, is probably relocating that, moving that back closer to Main Street, and utilizing the trail a little bit more, kind of getting it out of the backyard and stuff. But it's really new structures, new pumps, new controls.
Okay. The Cassav 40 turn back, so 500,000, are they, as the county, they have to have that road up to a certain standard, or we're gonna require things
Correct.
when they turn that
You
back?
might require a mill and overlay, there's a whole host of things. They're similar to the sanitary sewer upsizing. There might be some things that based on efficiency that you want to do for upgrades that they're not required or they wouldn't agree to pay for, but you would say like, okay, since we're gonna be digging around in the sandbox, we wanna do those things. We haven't identified those things,
Okay.
but we wanted to have that number as a placeholder to say, you could have costs related to it. You could say, we're just gonna take it as we're gonna take it with a mill and overlay, you're gonna fix these things, and that'd be the end of it. But this gives you at least, like I said, you're not approving the plan, but you're planning that you could spend 500,000, and if that comes to fruition, then you would say, okay, we have at least an idea of how that would impact the budget and property taxes. Steve, you wanna take off from there?
Okay. Let's see, so I guess
You
that,
wanna talk about some of those graphs? Is that
Yeah.
a good place to start?
that sounds like a great place to start. So as you kind of gathered, with the long-term plan, the big drivers are your capital assumptions and your debt tolerance, I guess, and then your existing reserves. What we try to do in the plan is to show a way that you can be most efficient with your dollars so that you can either build reserves as you go along, and if you have to bond, it's modeled in there. The slide that we have up there is the tax rates for the prior 5 or 6 years, or 6 years, and 2020 estimated. In the plan, we carried out till 2024. And one thing that it's just sort of a KPI or key performance indicator for the city, would be a tax rate. It's the relationship between the levy and your tax capacity. So what percentage of your total tax capacity is allocated to tax levy? So you're at about 50% last year, and we'd show a slight increase in going into 2020. General fund balance, because we've modeled that the general fund is break even, you lose ground on the target.
Glenn has a question.
Oh,
What
sorry.
page are these graphs on? Anybody?
It's
They're in the back.
22 of the PowerPoint.
Okay. Thank you.
So this graph is just the general fund, and it's showing the increase in the budget over the next 10 years or 8 years, and where we're targeting fund balance to be, because we're showing a break-even general fund, yet the expenditures are increasing, you lose ground on that target percentage. Reality is every year you have some either windfall or the general fund ends up slightly less, that you end up hitting that target. At least that's been the past performance.
How did the target become 50%? Is it like a industry? Is it just what you know about our city and anticipate, or?
It's it's really the realistic cash flow. You get your big dollars in June and December, June, July, and December. So 50% of your budget you are paying out of pocket until you get your major tax levy. So that's where the 50% really comes from. State auditor talks about 35 to 50%.
Okay, so nothing to do about growth or size of the city, it's from an accounting perspective?
Yeah, we look at the general fund as not having the fluctuations that some of the other funds have.
Okay.
It's consistent year over year.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, debt per capita. Here again, we're comparing you with Cologne, Laconia, and Victoria. And so this, you can see the spikes in this. I think this graph we didn't update to the 2027 model. This shows, this is what we were talking about. So the 14 million is shown in 2021. So that's the spike in the blue line. You can see relative for the past 4 or 5 years that you're pretty consistent on the averages. I think if you averaged everything out, you'd be right near the where the comparable cities are presented. And again, you're in a growth mode. I would think that your debt per capita is going to be higher until population fills up more.
Was this done with the assumption of the 6 million in 2021? Or
This actually is with the 14 million.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and then this is a $264,000 home. This is what the projected tax impact would be over these years. I mentioned with the tax rate, when we carried out for the next 5 or 6 years, we were showing historical. When we show the next 5 or 6 years, your tax rate is consistent and trends down. That would result in a pretty consistent city portion of taxes for a resident that currently has a house that's $264,000, which is the median home price in the city.
So I'm gonna back up now and kind of get at some of the other parts of the plan along with
Well, you said the median home price, is that current to this, I mean, when did that?
Well, actually, I
discussion
think that's, I see it says to 2017.
yeah, we're
Let's come
probably,
this up.
we're probably right around 300,000 or just a shade under that. So one of the things we've added for this year's discussion on the enterprise budgets is Kathy put together this nice table related to our debt service, so you can get an idea of what we're currently paying, what we expect to pay in 2020. And then sanitary sewer, this relates to rates, so we, instead of having our own wastewater treatment plant, we have all that stuff go to the Blue Lake facility in Shakopee. And so there's basically a price per thousand that we're charged. And then a later slide, you can see how that's changed over time. We're anticipating future debt service related to that upsizing that we discussed. Then we have prorated shares for vehicle rotation, and fiber upgrade is related to the Carver County fiber optic ring, and as time has gone on, we've slowly tried to upgrade our facilities for more consistent internet reliability and services. So our SCADA system, which is used to kind of notify the public services team when there's issues or areas that they need to address within our infrastructure system, and so that's a more reliable piece. Our monthly rate increase we show would be 4%, and that sanitary sewer is reflective of usage January, February, March, and then a 3% increase to the connection fee. And then here you can see our user rates over time. And then this is the related sanitary sewer debt service. A really big milestone here is the PFA loan for the wastewater treatment plant. So it's nice to not be paying debt service on an asset that you no longer have. Is that true, Steve?
That gets a little technical, but generally.
So that's a really big milestone for the city as it relates to the debt service for sanitary sewer. Then storm sewer or storm water, continuing the certified levy project. We got a proposal from WSB for support related to that project for $20,000. Future debt service related to the Jonathan Carver storm improvement project, and then capital outlay related to vehicle rotation. You can see a levy more. We've been in some precarious situation as it relates to our staff maintaining that levy, and so we have more that's kind of has a specialty related to cutting steeper slopes. And then kind of a really big piece that's been on our radar for a while, but the county is really starting to get into it, as well as MS4 stormwater pond inspections, and the time that it takes and the staff resources it takes to do those properly and report those. Monthly increase of 3%, and then stormwater area charge. That's new development based on developable acreage of 3%. And then you can see the corresponding stormwater debt service. And then did a sample bill. This is using the 6,000 gallons, so we can, as we move forward with that, we can create some updated models for what it would look like at different usage rates for that's 14 million scenario. I'm hearing that from the council. I don't know if Council Member Henry or Councilmember Mock weighed in on that, or is that the direction for staff to proceed with this $14 million philosophy?
Yeah. Break out your sales pitch.
This
Yes.
scenario doesn't include the 14, it's not the 14.
Correct.
It's the,
This is the 5%.
Correct.
okay, got it.
To answer your question, yes, that's what I'm hearing. Is the direction.
So we went through that slide, and then a couple other pieces related that are in the plan that I wanted to point out. This is kind of the Parks and Trails capital outlay. So the really big piece, primarily, funded by, and this is kind of back up on how park dedication is funded. There's a park dedication fee, but then based on the plan, which Aaron is working on as a part of the park master plan, there's basically a prorated share that the city allocates every year within the general fund budget. That's the city's share to make sure that new development isn't shouldering the burden of park development. So it provides a nexus for the, I hate saying that word, it provides a nexus for, it provides a nexus to make sure that development is paying their fair share and residents are paying their fair share. This, don't like when I make Larry Harris happy.
So that's interesting. So the underpass gets included in parks.
Correct.
Sweet.
Yep. It's prorated share, but yes.
But I know, but it's still in that
Yep.
same bucket. Okay.
And then park maintenance, just items, we wanted to really develop an idea. This isn't related to connection fees or park dedication fees, etc. But to give you an idea of the things that public services is thinking about in relationship to parks and how that's planned for and paid for. And then we went over these slides. So that's kind of the long-term plan at 2020 enterprise fund budgets. Any additional questions or information that you want to see as we move forward?
And I can redo for the 14.
Correct. Yeah.
And as far as the 14, are we pretty, I know it's early, But as far as that, as an estimated number for a water treatment plant, are we fairly certain we can do it in 14 or under? Is that gonna be, because we just went through the city hall process and that was a number that was a little bit of a moving target in the early phases. And I understand that there's some of that with these construction and infrastructure projects, but I just wanna make sure that we've got a number that we're,
Well,
They're
the
always
best
a
I
moving
can, and
target.
That's always a loaded question for me, because obviously you can never issue a guarantee, but I can say on the level of, is this conservative or is this a construction estimate?
Yep.
It remains highly conservative. I was toying with whether or not we'd wanna bring that number down, and.
and we do.
Bring that number down
Ultimately.
even in our planning estimates. But, we feel at this point that, it was probably more appropriate to say, all right, here's what we would consider to be the maybe 85% chance that it should be substantially lower than this. If steel and concrete goes through the roof in the next 2 years, all of a sudden we could have $2 million of unforeseen construction costs that we couldn't possibly predict at this point. So those are the types of things that we can't guarantee in our pricing estimates, but it's heavily conservative to the degree that we'd expect it to be,
Okay.
$1 million or so less.
That would just
Or
come out of
depending on how the
engineering
design
fees,
is.
wouldn't it?
Yeah. There you go.
I don't wanna hear a number
Contingency.
to be appeased and excited about it,
Yeah.
but, I want a realistic number, but I do want it as bare bones as possible, because this is not a,
Well, we're talking about sharpening our pencils. What are we sharpening to? What is the expectation when we say let's sharpen our pencils? Because I've heard that a couple times. So what
I
are
don't
we-
know that's why we're looking at the
But
engineers, I don't know what the water
One of the
treatment is, so-
pieces that we'll have to do is that we planned either way as a next step is to have Dan and Brian and kind of the specialized folks on the Bolton and Mink team come in and present what this actually, means. So think of it as like, when we discussed the floor plan for City Hall, this is basically the floor plan for the water plant. And you'll have a better idea of what would be a sharpened pencil thing. So is it, the thing that I think about that I understand is construction materials and the type of building. You can see some pretty impressive looking water treatment plants throughout the metro area that have a lot of brick and a lot of glass, and they have,
Concrete and steel.
right. And so what do you want that to look like? Are there other items?
Concrete
I don't know
and
what
steel.
those items are, but it's our responsibility to bring you that information. And if there are areas that you could do this but not that, and there are alternatives, lower cost alternatives, those are the types of things that we want to bring to you. We'll probably need a month or so to kind of get our hands around this and then come back to you, so.
Would this be eligible for PFA or not?
We have looked at that substantially. We think your median household income is too high to really get into the territory of, PFA. We do a lot of PFA.
PFA is,
And low interest financing.
Public Facilities Authority.
Yeah, and they offer low interest loans is effectively what they do. And so the.
Well, it's something to
interest
look
rate is
into, isn't
dependent
it?
on-
Can we give them the 2017 numbers?
Yeah.
give them that report.
So,
Okay.
yeah, and we'll continue looking at different funding opportunities and such, and we'll continue trying to get that number so that it gets to be, a more real engineering number. But again, we're still talking about 20% contingencies and things to that nature. And on a job this size, that's over $2.5 million, so. Or that's almost $2.5 million, so it's a lot.
And there was land acquisition for this, correct?
Correct.
900,000, I thought.
600,000, that was a separate line item.
It was, yeah.
So it's outside of the 14 million, because we
Buy
have
it
to
now.
acquire property either way.
Has there been any thought as to where it might go? Or are we gonna go through that whole focus groups on where it should be and?
We have some good candidates. We're just going through a process of finding out who is willing and able to sell property at this point.
Can we name it after them or something?
For $1 million.
We're paying them.
14 million.
Oh, they would pay for the naming rights, that's what you want.
So,
Oh, I got it.
I see a franchise, yeah.
I see.
Well, that
segues
nicely into.
Yeah, that's good segue.
So, one of the items that the council had within their strategic plan was to talk about franchise fees, and this is really kind of fitting hand in glove, because there's a situation related to, so Jaguar Communications is coming into the city to provide internet and cable too, and they want to provide cable TV service already, or in addition to that. And so there's some details within that I'm gonna ask the city attorney to get into, but before we get into kind of the dynamics of the nuts and bolts of that, Steve's firm has put together a study, and so I have 3 slides in here that I've taken information from Steve. This is the pros and cons. The next slide is what we believe can be generated, and then the 3rd slide is what your peer cities or surrounding cities have charged for franchise fees. So, Steve, if you want to take it away from here.
Yeah, we've helped several cities over the last year. It seems to be a hotter topic right now. And I think best practices has been when you're considering a franchise fee, if you're considering funding an activity of the city. You know, I don't think that when doing these things that if just because you have the opportunity to create revenue is not a great reason to consider doing it. So I think that's some of the thought process that was put in place here. We have a table of the benefits and the criticisms. I think those make sense. You know, the way the franchise fees do work, they're collected through the utilities on your behalf. There is a consistency in how they're done. The utility companies, they want to restrict you into the most narrow way of applying it that you can. But again, because they're doing it on your behalf. What I've seen from, I think it was Excel in another city, what their expectation were is that on their projects they wouldn't have permit fees that were like, it was about $1,000 in a decent sized city. So that was, you're not getting charged for the bookkeeping that they have to do. The table that we have here are comparable cities. We estimate that you'd have about $124,000 of revenue coming from cable, electric, and gas. Almost all cities have cable, and then as you can see, it's sort of hit or miss on the ones that have electric or gas. The ones that we've worked on in the last year or so, it's cities considering all options that are available. And then you see some of the notes there that vary. You know, Chaska obviously is one of the leaders around because of the electric utility that they have.
Well, and that's kind of nuts because it's Chaska Electric Company that the city is charging to run their pass-through fee to the residents. It's insane.
Well, you find that in most, and I have to be careful, I guess. A lot of the electric utilities I work with have a franchise fee built into their model.
Yeah, but not your own.
Yeah, that most do.
How many cities have their own electrical?
Not very many. No, a small percentage. But the ones that do have something like this. Okay, all that makes sense?
Can you go back to
Yeah.
that? I still wanted to.
These are nothing more than pass-through fees.
So related to
Thank
that,
you.
what we asked Steve to consider, so in the long-term plan, you can see that middle column there, current allocation and long-term plan. All that's funded through the general fund right now, and recognizing the funding need, you didn't think it was feasible to kind of blow up the long-term plan by putting in the cost to do these street projects. And so this table kind of in essence gives you a sense of how if you took a franchise fee and applied it to a specific item like streets and trail maintenance, what that might look like. I don't know if there's any other context you want to provide, Steve.
No, I think that's good. Again, this helps assign that franchise fee to something, and that's all about really relaying the message and telling the story.
Larry, would you mind just providing the council with a high-level overview from franchise fees in your world and how it would apply to the council decision-making process?
The city of Carver historically has not granted franchises. You don't have one with Excel, you don't have one with Centerpoint. They come by once a year and ask for them. They have people that come and bang on Friends' door and say, we need a franchise.
Who does?
The utilities, they want one because it makes a big difference to them, Mr. Henry, because this is how it impacts their bonding and their cost of doing business. A franchise runs usually for 20 to 30 years. It guarantees them that there's a provider. Generally, unless you're gonna impose a franchise fee, a lot of city attorneys are gonna say, don't grant them a franchise. The only thing a city typically gets in a franchise, if there's not a franchise fee, is provisions on how your right-of-way is maintained. Well, in Carver, as in many cities, we have a right-of-way ordinance that requires them to come in and get permits. So unless we're gonna seek a franchise fee, I wouldn't recommend a franchise. If you are, then we're gonna need a franchise ordinance. It gets a little timely, as Brent said, because the city's been approached by Jaguar, and franchises are not required for utilities in Minnesota, except for cable television. There's a statute for cable that dates back to about 1980 that requires them to have a franchise. So if Jaguar wants to come in, we're gonna have to create a franchise for them. And so that's one reason to think about starting the process. The other thing, and Mr. Merrick made some good points, I'm gonna want you to have a dedicated planned use for fund. It doesn't mean it's the only use, but the Minnesota Court of Appeals about 4 months ago in a case that's really complicated involving the city of Baxter and Brainerd in a fight over a franchise fee that Brainerd was imposing on Baxter because they were providing the electricity, said, basically, we don't really like this, and if you're gonna impose these franchises, have good found out reasons why you're gonna do it and how you're gonna do the money and what you're gonna do with it. That's just part of the planning process as we go through that. Steve's pretty much laid out how it works. The utilities are kind of cranky, they don't like to do it, but they have to. We can make them do it. It's about a 6-month process. The council won't see much of it, but for staff and the consultants that are involved, it's a root canal without Novocaine, because the utilities are obstructive.
What is the way you do tonight?
They delay it.
Oh, we're in the sandbox.
I mean, they delay it, but ultimately they'll do it from start to stop. I agree with Steve. It's about a 6-month process before you start collecting, or when you start it. But they'll do it, but recognize, it shows up as a line item on the utility bill. And in Excel, it'll say franchise fee to City of Carver. I mean, there's no getting around it.
You mentioned a franchise fee for Jaguar because they're cable. Does Comcast have one?
We're trying to figure that out.
Okay.
See, there used to be a joint cable commission, and I think Comcast was part of that. This came up from Brent last week, and Comcast has been here literally forever, well before my time, so I gotta find out. Because the other thing, that becomes an issue because in the cable franchise statute, there's a most favored nation provision, so there's enough. We can't have a different deal price-wise with Jaguar than we have with Comcast, so that's part of the process, we have to figure that out.
I have a question. Does the cable statute say anything about the length of the commitment or the contract, or?
It does. I can't remember what it is
Yeah.
right now.
Something to come back with?
It's in there. When we come back with it, I'll let you all know. I mean, to be honest, it's the first time in 25 years I've had a cable franchise. Brett told me, I'm going, well, yeah, I've worked on those, but it's been so long ago because I haven't seen a new cable outfit come in anywhere forever. And Dish and Digital, they're not cable, they're not required to do it. And that's really been the innovation in how television gets developed. And, and then Hulu and everybody else that you take through the internet isn't required to do it. So, so it's a bit of a new one for me. I actually had to find the old statute and read it.
It's probably a dying revenue source too. I mean,
It is.
that 16,000, there, at least the exposure isn't too great.
Do these other cities that have franchise fees, they have specific funds that they're using this money for, I'm assuming?
Oh, not so much. I mean, and they get rated all the time. And that's part of the issue that the Court of Appeals didn't like. I mean, the best example I would give would be your neighbor to the north, Victoria, that imposed the franchise fee for a pretty good reason. They wanted to bury some major power lines, some very significant KV power lines, and they wanted to use a franchise fee to do it. Well, they ran into other financial problems and the money started going to other places. And, that's kind of what happens. And that's, I think, the Court of Appeals didn't say no. The case really involved another issue in a fight between, in our business, everybody knows that Baxter and Brainerd don't get along. And they haven't for years and years and years, and this is sort of their ongoing civil wars with each other. But the court was not happy about cities adopting, and there are a couple paragraphs in the opinion. The court was the case turned on, but said, there ought to be a good reason for doing this.
Okay.
So, in anticipating that there may be future challenges, if the city's gonna go through the process, one of our jobs as staffing consultants is to make sure you have well-founded reasons for how the money's gonna go out.
I know this is only going out to 2026, but I'm assuming beyond that, we still have plenty of roads that are aging like this.
Correct. This was that's a really good question to ask. So one of the things that kind of didn't make it into the 2020 budget was doing a pavement management plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you see here is kind of a kind of Cliff Notes version, but when you see the pavement management plan, you'll spell out or identify needs for many, many years that'll be able to be funded through that,
Okay.
should you choose to move forward. I think the piece that would be helpful for me is if you are interested, what I would do as a next step would be lay out with probably some help from Larry and some other team members, lay out a decision-making process and with like a schedule with milestones and then say, okay, this is the process you'd use to do the decision-making, and bring that to a regular meeting. That would kind of kick it off. But if you tell us tonight, we're just not interested in this, then we wouldn't go through that exercise.
Thoughts?
I'm interested in it.
I'm interested, yeah, even if it's just a small amount, just to get something, the process has started.
I'm interested too. Brent and I spoke this afternoon, and I think for a long time there's a lot of pride among this group that we didn't have franchise fees outside of these four walls, proverbially. That doesn't mean anything. Nobody knows that we don't have franchise fees. The way it's being presented as a revenue stream for these street improvement projects, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. And plus we have an impetus to do it, right? We've got a new provider coming in where we gotta do something anyway.
Right.
So it's not like we just came out with this out of the air, right? So all of a sudden we need it. We need to do something. So I support it. Let's look into it.
Would support just that one area or?
I support
and
looking
that's how
at
you choose it,
franchise fees.
kinda
I
looking
like
at it
the
all.
idea of street maintenance as a fund to target, just because we know that this is gonna be not inexpensive and continuous over the next several years.
And the money's gonna have to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
If you look at these streets, we're all familiar with these, and if anybody in here said, no, I think that Hershey is just fine. Public Services didn't just refill a huge pothole on High Street within the last week. It's all good. We don't need that. It's got another 20 years in it. That's not true. These streets are failing.
Agreed.
Christy, Glenn?
We bantered around franchise fees a few years ago. And anybody who reads any of their bills with the city of Carver do. Everybody's, we got another new tax, it's just going through this. It's a revenue stream, but it's a pass-through. Utilities like it because of their bonding? Is that what you were thinking?
Well, no, I mean, utilities want franchise ordinances because they want to have all their cities tied up.
Got it.
It has a positive impact on their bond rating. They don't particularly like collecting and remitting franchise fees because it's a pain in the butt. The utilities gold standard is a franchise fee, there's a franchise ordinance with a city that doesn't impose a franchise fee. And we don't do that in Carver. We haven't done that for a long, long time.
I think too, some of that just goes into communications.
Yeah.
We have a communications director, but a lot of it just is how we communicate it to residents.
How we communicate all of these things that are suddenly coming into
Yeah.
I mean, that, you can explain it till you're blue in the face, but it's still money out of people's pockets that you can say, oh, here's, here's
It's
a
only
pretty
$5
picture.
here, it's only $3
But pretty
there.
soon, it's not just 5 here and 5 there.
It's 19 here for just a pull a permit.
But we're talking about big things coming up. I'm not saying these things aren't needed, but we have a lot of money that's gonna be coming out that we're expecting residents to pay. And when we say things like, well, the city is gonna do this, no, that money isn't the city's, the money is every resident who pays whatever taxes or whatever fees they're paying in this town.
Well,
And this
everybody's
county,
got a
so-
gas bill, everybody's got a water bill, everybody's got
Okay, let's let Christie talk.
electricity.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So I'm struggling with this. When we not alone, but when it tacks onto all of the other things together. So I can't say that I'm for it.
Holistically, it's, what we're talking about tonight is a lot of money. A lot of money to a lot of people. Yeah, this is death by 100 cuts with a little franchise fee, but it's every month. Every month, every month. And it's money out of their pockets. I've struggled with franchise fees, I just do.
And what happens with the transit in a couple of years, if you could remind?
200,000?
So essentially, we have to match 20% of the operation grant that was provided to the city, so.
And we can't use fare revenue, correct?
So some of that is deferred by in-kind services that we're providing, but it's probably gonna be that $180,000 to $200,000 numbers, that seem correct?
Yes.
So it's then based on, there are a couple of scenarios that we've played out where if we, the station might end up being an asset, could we transfer that asset with certain approvals to another company or agency, and in turn they pay our match. There's, we might have to go to the special capital fund and say, okay, we're gonna use that to pay that off. There are some things that we're gonna have to have a discussion similar to this and say, okay, here are our options as we draw close to that grant period. But, I would plan for $200,000.
In what year?
I'd say we're solid through 2020 probably.
So next year.
We'll
Right
have
on
this
the
conversation
conversation
next
next
year.
Okay.
200,000 here, 14 million here. Paying off the bond for the city hall and all the other street improvement projects that we've done the last 6 years. Granted, we've done a hell of a job making sure that the bondings and everything was priced out so it's affordable. But there's gonna come a point of this water treatment facility is gonna be a tough bill for people. It just is.
I don't disagree with you, but it's a
Oh, I know.
need.
What's
It's gonna
the,
be hard to go without water.
oh, I don't disagree with that, okay? That's a need. It's one of the necessities of life. Franchise fees, is it a need or is it a want?
But this isn't a capital expenditure, this is a revenue generator. And I look at it as helping with these capital expenditures that we're gonna need to keep our streets maintained and in okay shape.
And where's the revenue coming from?
The franchise fees.
Well, residents.
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
residents. I think that's the point that is trying to make, is that it's another fee that we're taking, it's another
Yeah.
bill, it's another.
No, I hear you,
Yeah.
and the timing of talking about all of this
Yeah.
tonight isn't
Awesome.
my favorite, or I think this is the one thing that when we look at our tax rates versus Chaska and Victoria, and we're not sitting pretty, this is something, not that I feel that we should be doing it because they're doing it, but I think it's easier in that you can't just say, well, I'm gonna move to Chaska because they don't have franchise fees, you're wrong. This is something that's being done according to this list fairly uniformly in not only our peer cities, but also our neighboring cities.
So what I'll do is I'll develop a work plan for council consideration, and then you can act that, just give me a month or so to put that together. Put it up or down, I'm moving forward.
That's good. Moving on.
I would suggest to the council that we take items 4 and 5 and add those to the regular meeting agenda under new business.
Okay, sounds wonderful.
So with that,
Sounds good. Okay, then moving on to item number, so we will move items for the JCP Improvement Project, the Corridor Design Committee, and the Hawthorne Ridge Trail, item number 5 on the action agenda to the regular meeting agenda. Number 6.
Thank you.
Brett, City Manager's Report.
are we a go for the striping tomorrow?
Just for the main line striping, the yellow. The
So
white will
we're
be later.
striping the yellow line tomorrow, we're still coordinating on the parking striping, which would be done later in the week.
Perhaps later this
Weather
week or
dependent.
early, yep.
And then you're gonna do a blue handicap one too, so you can,
Yep.
yellow, like,
The other thing I wanted to remind the council of, be a week from Friday, I believe, for the ICMA conference, International City County Management Association. So I will not be at your next council meeting on the 21st,
Where's the meeting this year?
Nashville.
Ooh, fun.
Nashville, Tennessee.
I don't think we should pay for that vacation.
It's a good thing. It's a good
Vacation, it's continuing ed. Okay. Anything else? All right, council requests? None, hearing none?
I have one, oh, sorry, I thought you were gonna like look around the room, sorry.
I did, but.
Oh, I
You
was
weren't
looking
making
down,
contact.
sorry. Brian, Jaguar, I know that there were some sidewalks and things that were broken downtown here.
Yep.
Have we addressed that? I know there are some residents getting nervous before winter comes and snow.
So Aaron's been working with Jaguar, getting a schedule and everything, kind of a list of everything together for them, so.
Yeah, they were doing some work last Friday, I believe, some establishment work. There's still concrete replacements that have to occur and some other
Will
so
that be done this fall?
that's what we're pressing them to do, so it's been kind of a struggle to get them out here, but we are.
We're third street sidewalks out there.
Yep.
All right. That's all I have. Okay.
Okay, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Henry and a second by Councilmember Mock. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?